Welcome back to World FinTech Festival India 2021, everyone. And now in today's connected society, the digital payments are pervasive and have simplified payments and transactions. Its enormous growth in India can be attributed to technological advancements, internet penetration, mobile phone uptake, online payment adoption by consumers, SMBs, and banks alike. Innovative solutions such as UPIs, IMPS, wallet integration, and so on, as well as the presence of a conducive environment by policymakers and the government to transform India into a cashless society. Now, however, as an unforeseen consequence of the advancing momentum, the threat landscape has grown dynamically. This calls for all players in the payment ecosystem to work together to reduce the growth of fraud and payment scams. How are fintechs managing frauds in this ever-changing digital world? Let's find out in our next session, which is a trialogue on online payments and managing fraud. This session is moderated by Ms. Richa Mukherjee, Member FACE, Director, Public Policy and Corporate Affairs at PayU India. Richa is joined by Jose Thattil, Chief Executive Officer and Co-founder, FeeCommerce, and Mr. Sujay Das, Chief Risk Officer at Freo. Over to you, Richa.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Amit, for the generous introduction. Once again, a very good morning to my panelists, Joseph Thattil and Sujay Das, and to everyone joining us virtually at World FinTech Festival on 12th November 2021. Welcome, and here we start the discussion on our topic, online payments and managing fraud. We all know that in last 1.5 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to increase in digital payments and dependence on the digital economy. There has also been a rise in fraud digital schemes against businesses. While the pandemic has been a major catalyst for the adoption and growth of digital payments in India, but the transaction growth has been accompanied by the emergence of payments-focused scams with many first-time users targeted by fraudsters. This is as per the recent study conducted by YouGov and ACI worldwide. Also, there are several other research, especially by Juniper Research, which found out that this is going to have a ripple effect in terms of the merchant losses, in terms of the online payment fraud, which will exceed to $206 billion cumulatively for the period between 2021 and 2025. So overall, the pandemic has led to the surge in synthetic identity, account takeover fraud, which threatens the security of the entire accounts, associated payment data, and it is going to have a ripple effect as such on the economy. In parallel world, Reserve Bank of India, the regulator, acknowledges the need to manage online payments and fraud. Accordingly, in its annual report, which released in 2020, it announced the creation of Central Payments Fraud Information Registry, which is a web-based reporting platform to facilitate online payment fraud reporting by system participants. I feel there is greater need to be more aware about this kind of a platform so that we can all access it and utilize it and leverage it as and when the fraud happens. Also, I want to highlight some of the key trends in the digital and the online fraud in terms of the landscape. There are various kinds of frauds that are perpetrated on the digital platform. First, of course, we know is the identity theft, wherein the bad elements make full use of personal data and identity to create tactical cyber crimes, such as denial of services, botnets, advanced persistent threats, and monetization channels. Then there are card not present fraud, wherein you have somehow given your credit card details or a debit card details by mistake to fraudster. And then there are e-commerce fraud, the cybersecurity related frauds, which include identity theft, card detail theft, etc. And of course, then there are future fraud possibilities in this e-commerce fraud, such as spoofing of current fraud prevention and detection mechanisms by device identifiers like IMEI, MAC address, etc. And we also have, which are known as malware or man-in-the-middle attacks, which is essentially involve the criminal breaching a bank or the entire payment card processor to manipulate fraud detection controls as well as alter the customer accounts. And we have also heard of chargeback frauds or friendly fraud as they are called. And the most underrated but most widely used is the darknet activity, which cybercrime criminals use to forge the ID documents, stole the steal the ID data, credentials, spoof pages, etc. So this was my setting up of the session. I want to now move to my esteemed panelists and want to initiate this dialogue with them. Welcome once again to Jose and Sujay. I will start by asking some of the questions to both of you, and we'll then take the individual question. So I'll start with you, Jose. How do you think have the trends in online frauds evolved since last couple of years, and especially since the pandemic, with more people moving to digital payments? And subsequent question is, what could be some areas where we might witness the potential rise in the online frauds?
Thanks, Richa. So, Richa, as you are aware, we at FiCommerce, we process payments for some very large conglomerates in India. These includes e-commerce, the e-commerce ecosystem, insurance companies, utility companies, educational institutions, all of that. What happened during the pandemic, and you nicely summed it up, that many businesses were forced to go online, forced to build out digital channels almost overnight to survive, which meant that their consumers were also forced to adapt, to digital transactions almost overnight. This drastically changing consumer behavior. So we had senior citizens doing their first ever digital transaction. We had, people in rural villages and towns doing probably for the first time scanning a QR and making a payment and stuff like that. So all of this, as we said, has led to increasing fraud. Now, Amit, in his introduction said that, this increase in fraud, was it unforeseen? I don't think so, because, whenever volumes increase, wherever transactions increase, fraud is bound to follow. And it's for us payment industry professionals to, perpetually be ahead of the fraud in that sense. So, two things, that we have seen over the, so in fact, interestingly, in RBI came out with a report that said in FY20, from a banking fraud perspective, they saw an increase of almost 2.5x, 2.5 times from the previous year. And more specifically, if you were to look at just payments and card-related fraud, that itself went up by 1.7 times. So we all know that it's been transactions have increased multifold. Fraud has also sort of increased. Two specific areas that we've seen a lot of fraud happen, and we feel that this would only increase. One is what we call as the social engineering scams, right? Where consumers, fraudsters really take advantage of consumers not being comfortable with this digital behavior. They manipulate consumers to performing actions or giving away personal information like OTPs, for example. So though dual factor authentication is mandatory in the country, but we almost every week read about new time users or people who are not so digitally savvy being persuaded to part away with OTP or the pins and stuff like that. This is something that of late we have seen a drastic increase in. The other aspect, again, that's not been talked about so much, is merchant fraud. So, again, with digitization, almost overnight, you see new businesses setting up fake websites, promising fraudulent stuff or, fake merchandise. In fact, at the height of the COVID, we had websites that are set up overnight promising essential medicines like remdesivir, and these were all fake. So I think the merchant fraud is also something significant, and it is bound to grow in the growing times, given the fact that consumers have started transacting digitally and they're open to transacting on newer websites. So therefore, that's one area that we feel will also go up.
Sure. Thanks, Joseph, for that. And I do agree with you that social engineering frauds and the merchant frauds that you highlighted, and as the digital payments ramp up, so does the online fraud. I would like to direct this question to Sujay. Sujay, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay, Richa. Thank you. As you and Jose rightly pointed out, since the pandemic, we see a huge increase in financial transactions being done through digital mode. You call it digital payment, you call it digital lending, digital banking, digital investment. It's like digital. It's the way to go. But with that, what we see are a huge amount of different financial apps that are being launched almost every other day. Now, as you know, not always these apps get launched with perfection. The initial days, it takes time to perfect it. So one of the trends that we see are fraudsters trying to find loopholes or inefficiencies in these new apps and reap benefit by doing fraud through the digital systems and then run away with the money. So that is something that so anybody who's launching these apps need to be careful about in terms of testing, and all the loopholes should be taken care of. I think Jose talked about the social engineering. That also we see quite a bit happening, where the fraudster poses as a genuine customer service agent, calls the customer, provides few personal information which they might have got from the social media, and ask for security questions, OTP, passwords, and once you provide that, once the customer provides that, they change everything and run away with that money. The other pattern, because since Freo, we are a neobank, and one of the product is the lending product, which we name as MoneyTap, which was the first app-based credit line. The other information in consumer lending that we see is providing wrong information. So the fraudster would tend to give few information, which when you check with some sources will be correct, but then the address might be wrong, so that you cannot trace them. Now, in this new age, since a lot of people are working from home, people have moved towards their hometown. So the workplace and the home is very different. So it becomes difficult to trace between a genuine customer and a fraudster who's giving the wrong information. So a lot of intelligence needs to be built out at this point of time to actually see who's the genuine customer and who's a fraudster. So these are some of the patterns that we are seeing, and I believe that these will come, evolve in much, sophisticated ways as we go more into digital space.
Yes, Sujay. So continuing in the same breath of what you were just mentioning, I want to continue with you and want to ask you this. What are the different fraud management and mitigation measures or products which has been launched by your company or adopted by your company?
Richa, quite a few tools that we use to actually identify fraudulent activities. I'll mention few of them. One of them, in fact, are the new age machine learning algorithms, which help in identifying hidden patterns. So we use machine learning algorithms to come up with fraud scorecards. These scorecards then triggers high suspicious fraud accounts or activities, and then we investigate further to see whether we want to approve or decline for credit to those customers. Also, we look at digital addresses like device, IP, and try to in terms of velocity and duplicity, as well as physical address related information, and try to triangulate with different sources to see whether this is the genuine customer. There are new OCR technologies that have come in where we do selfie checks, document verification. There are quite a few things. Even emails, you can actually look at age and pattern of emails to find out fraudulent activities. Plus, on top of that, the bureaus, the credit bureaus help us with the globally accepted fraud tools that they have. And we use quite a bit of those as well to actually see how we can mitigate fraud and, regulate this. We have a fraud management team who's actually working day in and day out in innovative ideas and doing innovations to actually mitigate the innovative frauds that are actually coming in the world.
Yes. So actually, it's also about not only tackling fraud, but also preempting fraud and being ahead of the curve. Very well said. So Jose, I want to take this question to you, please.
So Richard, the way at FiCommerce we sort of channelize our attempts at reducing fraud are twofold. One is preventing fraud or security breaches and other things in our dealings with our customers, that's the businesses, and the other is helping our businesses and their consumers in battling fraud. So two elements to this. In our offering to the merchants, apart from the state-of-the-art network security and all of that, and also being certified under PCI DSS, which you'd be aware, Richa, is the highest standard in terms of security. We are very uniquely, we've gotten ourselves all our applications that we use certified under PADSS as well, which is the payments application side of things, and not just the infrastructure and the deployment, but also the core application. So that goes a long way in actually guaranteeing security for our customers, that's the businesses. Coming to how do we help our businesses and their consumers battle fraud. So I'll give you two very, very recent examples. And both of them were largely driven by some RBI mandates.
Yeah.
As you know, September 30th, there was a mandate, or rather October 1st, there was a mandate by RBI on, consumer consent required for mandates or recurring transactions.
E-mandates, yes.
E-mandates. So there, again, we were among the, very first payment providers to roll it out for our merchants and stuff like that. What this means is, so far, in fact, I'm sure a lot of our viewers would have also seen disruptions in their, recurring payments, especially on entertainment, OTT channels and stuff like that, where they've probably given their card numbers and all of a sudden you get an alert saying it stopped working. So what's happened is now RBI has made it mandatory that every month there is a debit, you as a consumer have the power to authorize it or to negate it. So that's sort of giving back the consumer the power to go ahead with the transaction. The second is even more interesting, which is tokenization.
Yeah.
This will come up, starting January 1st. And this is deep tech. This is possibly the biggest tech, in terms of payments from the days of EMV or chip. So there was chip, and now I would say tokenization, and this is deep tech. So again, we've been in the forefront of developing solutions, and you'll soon be reading about it as well, where we'll be launching with one of the India's largest businesses, where every time a consumer stores his card number with a business, this card number or the card credentials get tokenized. And we've seen world over security breaches happen and, all of that. So this is a very effective way of combating these breaches. And because at the end of it, the business then where you store your card number, they don't really have access to your clear card number. They just have an access to a token, which really is of not too much of use even if their security systems were to be breached. So I think these are initiatives that we've been continuously working on and providing both our merchants as well as their consumers the best in terms of security and fraud prevention.
Right, especially the last two that you mentioned on the recurring e-mandate as well as the tokenization, non-storage of the card credentials. I think that is the one great disruptor, and hopefully it should be able to tackle a lot of frauds that are impending, and very well that is all impacting us, and each of the entities is taking the sufficient measures to curb it. Very well said. Sujay, I want to
The
ask.
only unfortunate part is, we talked about social engineering scams. I
Yeah.
think that's where, my 2 cents, technology may not be able to fully solve it.
Right.
There's a lot to do with education and stuff like that, which possibly Sujay would be able to throw light on.
Yes. And we will also cover that. How will the awareness and the inclusivity part also help in curbing the fraud mechanisms and the fraud ecosystem? So, Sujay, I want to ask you this: how do you foresee emerging technologies help in changing the fraud management scenario? You did cover that in your earlier talk discussion, but I still want to ask you, and if you can elaborate a bit on
Yeah.
that.
So, Richa, I will add this with not only technology but with data.
Yes.
Because the more information you have about a customer digitally, you need to know about it. So what I see are that there are thoughts and exploration work at this point of time going on by some of the organizations to create account aggregators.
Yes.
So account aggregators, this will store information of customers' financial transaction, including banking, investments, insurance, etc. Now, while credit bureaus have done a great job in storing and sharing the credit history of customers, these account aggregators will have all the other financial transactions of the customers.
Yes.
So a customer can give consent to share this information with the financial institutions while they avail, credit or other financial products. So I believe this is a big step where, this has the potential to reduce fraud to a great extent in terms of document forgery, identity theft, and different other patterns. Also, what we see is, the advanced OCR technologies that are coming in. This can help a lot in identifying document and image forgery. So the other is, these days, there are a lot of API integrations that are available with different utility services to know about the customer and verify some of the information that they provide. I believe some of all of these things, as fraud patterns are evolving, these technologies as they evolve will change, will bring a lot of change and help us in reducing the fraud losses in future.
Yes, I definitely feel that account aggregator framework, and wherein some of the entities have already gotten the license, that will also help a great deal for the payment industry and for the online fraud also. But of course, for that we need a proper, well architectured consent framework, which is also in progress. And to what you mentioned about the API integration, there are a lot of initiatives that the government and the RBI is coming out with, to help this kind of API integration, overlay services, whether it is a new banking or digital banking or OCEN that they launched last year, Open Credit Enablement Network, that is also going to involve a lot of people so that they are also aware what these are, and it can also drive the awareness and financial inclusivity.
Right.
Jose, I would want to move to you to the question that we know that India is a forerunner when it comes to digital payments and products, with UPI being a classic example, and so many examples that we've been talking about in our discussion. How do you rate India in terms of providing a safe and seamless payments experience to customers vis-a-vis the developed nations? Because this is very important of how we scale from here.
I think, Richa, we are, up there in terms of security. And I think the regulator has to be given due credit for this. Ages ago, I mean, maybe 5-7 years ago, they made dual factor authentication mandatory. And there were, of course, initial complaints from merchants saying transaction volumes would suffer and stuff like that. Yes, there was an initial dip. But because of the confidence now that the consumer has, you see e-commerce really going through the roof, right? Because of the fact that he knows that because of a dual factor authentication, because he'll get an OTP for performing a transaction, he's far, far more confident of doing an online transaction. Even if you were to look at, say, something like UPI. So on one side, if you see, the regulator has been progressive to adopt newer solutions like UPI, which possibly nowhere else in the world it's there. At the same time, the regulator has kept the consumer confidence as key, So therefore, they've not gone wild in terms of, just opening up everything. They sort of opened it up in steps. So even when UPI first came in, there was a limit on the transaction values. Even today there exists, but the limit has been progressively increased. Yes. Secondly, it's only after a few years the regulator actually opened up, say, something like autopay, where the consumer is less, gives a mandate, and there are, recurring transactions on UPI. So it was not, everything was not done on the same day and the same, wherein if that were to be the case, then there could have been more incidents of fraud and leading to erosion of consumer confidence. Now going forward, there are also thoughts that, going forward, UPI may be enabled on credit cards as well. So it's this whole progressive adoption, I think, has really, and at the same time ensuring that consumer confidence is key. Yeah. So even as we talked of the consumer consent required for a mandate or a tokenization, all of this, I think we are way up there in terms of consumer security and confidence. And it's probably a model that most countries across the globe would want to adopt.
Sure. I am fully aware and fully cognizant of the regulators and the governments initiating mechanisms to prevent financial fraud or any kind of online fraud. And they have done various measures, whether it is prescribing turnaround time and customer compensation for failed transactions, whether it is, banks advising to the banks to provide online alerts for all card transactions, whether card present, card not present transactions. And as you rightly mentioned, of mandatorily introducing additional factor authentication, MFA, for all transactions, CN, card not present transactions. Definitely. So just to continue on that, Jose, I want to ask you, RBI and the government, they are proactively pushing cashless payments, and also they set up this fraud information registry. What are the other measures that, suggestions that you can let us know, which can ensure a secure cyberspace for digital transactions?
So one step that the RBI has taken, it's probably the best direction, is to get payment aggregators like ourselves actually licensed and certified.
Yes.
Which essentially means that on one side, RBI has a direct oversight on us. On the other is we as payment aggregators get a direct audience with RBI. So if there is something earlier, we had to go through banks, which, right. So therefore RBI as a regulator is very keen to have regulatory oversight directly on us. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Then, of course, other things like reporting of data breaches have been made mandatory for banks and stuff like that. Yeah. All this, if you were to look back maybe a few years ago, a data breach was supposed to be kept, hushed and not really too much spoken about it. I think it's only when these are actually shared, the industry as a whole grows. So these have been steps in the right direction. One thing that I feel, and this broadly links up with the first point that I talked about, merchant fraud, is actually having a very updated negative merchant registry.
Right.
With merchant fraud actually poised to increase. I think the whole tracking of negative merchants, the businesses that they do, the chargebacks that happen, I think that has to be centralized, and that has to be driven with a focus so that anyone and everyone in payments can actually benefit from that data. So if you were to ask me, this is one area I feel time has come now to actually drive it in a very focused manner.
Jose, to your last point of creating a repository for the fraudulent merchants, I think that step has already started.
Correct.
And I remember PCI, MEI, they have already taken the lead and they are in the process of setting it up. So yes, that's very valid point, and that is why
It's again, it's also the point is once set up, everyone has to contribute to that.
That means it has to be driven by all the payment players. It cannot be just focused to a couple of them, so as to have the real impact in terms of tracking it. Definitely. RBI has also been issuing directions limiting the liability of customers in, the unauthorized electronic banking transactions. Banks warn users for the malicious activities in terms of awareness, how they should, raise a dispute in case of transaction if it is not initiated by them, etc. And this year in April, government also operationalized the national helpline and reporting platform for preventing financial loss due to cyber fraud. And I think today, Prime Minister is launching two schemes, out of which one is the overall ombudsman scheme, that one complaint, one number, and one scheme. So there are measures that the government and the regulators are doing to this effect. The government also launched the portal of consumerhelpline.gov.in. It's just that the merchants and the ecosystem and the players, they are not probably aware of what are the different mechanisms that are available to them to, report this kind of a fraud. Because not only the act of preempting, preventing, but also reporting the fraud also matters, so that, you can understand what has been the trajectory of that, and we can prevent from happening that in future. And of course, ombudsman scheme that they are launching today, and one which was launched in 2019. With this, Sujay, I want to ask you this question. How important is customer awareness and digital literacy when it comes to aiding business with their efforts in, fraud control? And do you think private sector should take a greater role in promoting digital literacy and awareness? Because RBI is really talking about it.
Yes, Richa, I think, as we are moving more and more towards digital day by day, it becomes extremely important for customers to have the awareness of how fraud can happen. It is also important for customers to understand what should be shared, what not should be shared in open social media, so that fraudsters don't misuse this information to con them. Social engineering we talked about, we see many a times that customers share OTP or password, and then, a fraud happens. I think private sector, banks, financial organizations, they need to play an important role in educating customers, provide awareness through different channels. So if I give you an example, in Freo, what we do is on a regular basis, almost on a weekly basis, we make snippets of different topics of digital lending and publish on a regular basis in different social media channels. So these not only talk about how they should maintain credit discipline, but also makes them aware of digital fraud patterns that are there, and how they should secure their data, what should be shared, what not should be shared, whom, when somebody calls, what is it that they should look out. So some of these awareness we do. Now, one more thing, I think, it is very important for customers to keep an eye on their credit bureau reports. Right. A check on their credit bureau reports can make them aware if there are any further activities, like identity theft has happened and your score has gone down and you were not aware at all. When you went to take a loan, you suddenly saw that they are not giving you a loan because your score has come down, but you have always paid, and you find out that some fraud has happened. So these days, you get free credit reports from different channels. For example, in Freo, we have an app named fit.credit. So customers can use that app to download their credit bureau score free of cost, and also monitor activities on a regular basis. So I believe it is of utmost importance that customers be aware of their transaction, the digital financial world, and the organizations. It is important that the organizations take these initiatives to increase the awareness for their customers and the world as a whole, actually.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I also feel that increased private sector participation in imparting the, awareness to the participants, to the players in the ecosystem, will also help a great deal in curbing and making them aware. In continuation of that, Sujay, a lot of initiatives and innovative solutions are being developed by businesses to counter frauds, and you yourself have mentioned, both of you have mentioned some of them. What are your views on this, and how can innovation be promoted by both businesses and policymakers?
Yeah, so I think innovation is key to mitigate fraud. Now, so I always say that, fraud management is an interactive strategy, which means that the fraudster always find different ways to study your strategy and innovate to break it. You react to that and find innovative ways to stop it. Again, the fraudster will innovate to break your innovation.
Yes.
So it's a continuous monitoring and innovation that is required to actually mitigate fraud. Now, from a business side, it is very important, to have, in the organization cultures of, having hackathons and contests to bring innovations on these. Also, I think at any point of time you launch a new product, there should be a process where a team or individuals tries to break it and does ethically fraudulent activities to test the product strength. This will help in fixing the issues much faster before any fraudster can hack the obvious things. So I would say that there should be initiatives to create these type of culture within the companies.
Yeah.
Now, I think Jose already talked about the negative database. I think it's also a time that all of us, not only the negative merchant, I believe, all of us, the financial institutes also should come together to even, store a negative consumer list as well, where fraud has happened with their identity details like phone, address, photo. And, the financial institutes can access as well as participate in that. And then this creation can help in reducing fraud a lot, I would say. So these are some of the initiatives that we should take, actually.
Of course. Yes, Sujay, definitely.
Richa, just one point here is to do with the retail payments itself. One thing that we'll soon see in the next few, maybe a year, 2 years, is with this fast exploding digital payments and with payments going to tier 2, tier 3 towns and villages with more and more Android devices being used, this whole concept of dual factor authentication where PIN is entered becoming, this whole concept of PIN on glass becoming more prevalent, So therefore, even today, a tap and go transaction is restricted to 5,000. How do we actually increase that? And at the same time, keep security. So that's again something I'm sure there's a lot of work on, and maybe even I'm sure PayU would also be doing a lot of work on tap and pin on glass. But these are, from a more specific, from a payments industry perspective, these are new advancements that you'll see happen.
So it's all about staying ahead of the curve and making that curve upward. Coming to my last question, in the interest of time, I want to ask you, Jose, is talent availability an impediment to development of sophisticated technologies to tackle cyber threats or any kind of frauds in India?
So Richard, let's face it. I mean, India is, facing a technology talent crunch. There is a shortage of digital talent leading to, high attrition, increased wages, all of that. In fact, apparently there's a 6 million, the gap is almost 6 million between demand and supply across countries like US, China, India, and Europe.
Yeah.
So, and given the pandemic has created this whole focus on digital transformation, there is enough and more opportunities for talent to, so definitely there is a crunch. But I believe India has the potential to meet this, by disrupting the traditional approach. So, there are a lot of tier 2, tier 3 towns which are now fast growing to become IT hubs in that sense, right? And even through reskilling or upskilling of current talent, So fortunately, I'm sure you'll agree, and Sujay as well, FinTech and payment tech has been a very hot sector for talent. And therefore, we've been fortunate to attract some of the best talent in the industry. Therefore, I think given the focus the whole industry has to, the whole world has towards fintechs, I think we'll continue attracting good talent. And so if we were to work around in a smart way, I think we should be able to address these challenges. So yes, to answer your question, yes, there is a tech crunch, but tech talent crunch, but probably the fintech area doesn't see that much of a challenge as possibly some of the other, non or not so glamorous areas.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sujay and Jose. Very well. This has been an amazing session with some fine insights. I want to conclude by saying that digital payment landscape has transformed, especially since 2019. COVID has infused a greater dynamism, especially small and medium business enterprises have been forced to migrate to the digital model, and consumers have changed their purchasing habit. Therefore, it's our collective responsibility to follow all the measures to secure the ecosystem diligently and let the system be resilient enough. Thank you, and I conclude the session here. Stay safe and take care.
I think it's the new normal with the technology that we are using now. But thank you very much, Richa, Sujay, and Jose. It has been a wonderful conversation. And to our audience, with that, we'll be moving on to our next session. To join us on our next session, which is on fintechs and collaborations between banks, please go ahead and refresh your web browser. We'll be back with you within a moment's time.